this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today we're going to take a look through this lovely vintage book all about underground worlds. Okay. Now some of the pages are quite shiny, so I'm going to try and be careful not to let too much light reflection occur on the pages for you. Now this is an old Time Life book, so the contents of this book are explorers of a Stygian realm, the birth of speleology, in the grip of the demon adventure, masters of making do, the sporting science, and then there are some essays as well. So this is called The Lure of the Abyss, and in this illustration we see a team of cavers exploring the 9-mile-long labyrinth of Saint Marcel d'Ardèche in south-eastern France, as they pause to survey the grandeur of a central gallery. The cave, carved out by the Ardèche River system tens of thousands of years ago, still offers tantalising opportunities for discovering unknown passages. So let's begin reading. My hair stood on end, my teeth chattered, my limbs trembled, declared one of literature's most famous cavers, as he entered a shaft and began the epic adventure recounted in Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth. Although Verne's tale is entirely fictional, he could not have captured better the misgivings many cavers feel as they step into dark and mysterious subterranean worlds. Yet apprehension is mixed with heady anticipation. Caves offer their visitors spectacular scenery, scientific marvels, and above all, the rare exhilaration of discovery. Caves are the result of minute incremental etchings of a variety of natural processes that over a period of many millennia have hollowed cavities extending for scores of miles into the Earth's interior. Passages wider than an interstate highway may feed into fissures that are breathlessly thin. Vertical shafts, often obscured by pitch-black shadows, plummet hundreds of feet. Yet here also are found some of nature's most exquisite artifacts. Beneath massive layers of limestone uplifted by some titanic convulsion, explorers may find a tiny, shimmering crystal more fragile than spun glass. By scrutinizing rock formations in caves, scientists have found clues to geologic events that occurred 1,000,000 years ago, and by studying the remarkable creatures that thrive in a cold, wet world of impenetrable darkness, these explorer scientists course it's not Yugoslavia anymore. The group, led by Austrian explorer Joseph Nagel, had been ordered to map the limestone caves of the area by Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. So let's begin reading. Andy Evis, a 30-year-old professional engineer employed by a Yorkshire colliery, discovered the first clue to the existence of a major cave in Borneo in late 1977. At the time he was sitting comfortably at home in Selby, England, perusing aerial photographs of a rainforest on the other side of the world. Evis was also the chairman of the International Speleological Union's Exploration Section, and the Royal Geographical Society had invited him and 5 other cave experts to join an expedition into the newly designated Gunung Mulu National Park in the Malaysian state of Sarawak on northern Borneo. While more than 100 scientists, including botanists, zoologists, ecologists, geologists, anthropologists, were to study the pristine rainforests above ground and prepare a management plan for the park, Evis and his comrades would probe its subterranean honeycomb of caves. The photographs of Mulu's unmapped jungle, which was populated only by nomadic Penan tribesmen, were dominated by a jagged 3-mile-wide limestone ridge that extended some 20 miles in a northeast-southwest direction in North Sarawak. The ridge, whose peaks reached as high as 6,000 feet, was a perfect example of what geologists call karst, the terrain formed by deeply eroded limestone. Most of the erosion is done by water rather than shedding rainwater. Karst absorbs it like a sponge. For 2 million years, heavy tropical rains had been sculpting the limestone into a strange, craggy landscape where rivers suddenly vanished into the ground. Yawning sinkholes opened in the earth and rock bridges spanned whole canyons. It was obvious to any experienced caver that this terrain concealed a labyrinth below ground. After surveying a few easily accessible Sarawak caves for the Malaysian government in 1961, geologist Gerald E. Wilford had reported that large, spectacular caves are most likely to be discovered in the uninhabited and relatively unexplored Melinau area between the Toto and Limbang rivers, a region within the 210 square mile park. Evis and his colleagues called themselves simply cavers, cave cognoscenti, detest the term spelunker, although scientifically inclined cavers do style themselves speleologists, but they were scarcely amateurs. The Royal Geographical Society had vetted both the caving experience and scientific credentials of these 6 before inviting them to join the expedition. Team members boasted professional expertise in geology, geomorphology, cave biology and hydrology. Among them, they had mapped and studied every major cavern in Europe, descending shafts hundreds of feet deep and spending days underground. Their skill in rock climbing techniques, belaying, brussicking, rappelling and the like, surpassed that of most mountaineers. phosphorescent stream had once flowed through the valley and under the cliff, dissolving the limestone beneath the overhang and perhaps leaving an enormous cave along its subterranean course. The hypothesis remained in the back of his mind during the ensuing months as the cavers attended to the details involved in mounting any wilderness expedition. Immunisations, solicitations of food and equipment, travel arrangements, fundraising. They arrived at the Mulu National Park base about 60 miles southeast of Miri on the southern end of the Limestone Ridge in March 1978. Local porters and tribesmen had assured expedition members that there were no caves in the region, but the cavers decided to pursue Evis's hunch, even though it would be an arduous gamble. Evis and two colleagues were guided to the site of the putative cave by the leader of the scientific expedition, Robin Hanbury Dennison, who had already scouted the area. With 4 porters, they slogged northeastward for 2 days through the knee-deep muck of a steamy floodplain, quickly becoming accustomed to the jungle hazards, a debilitating combination of 85 degrees Fahrenheit heat and 100% humidity, constant assaults by buzzing clouds of mosquitoes and sandflies, encounters with leeches, centipedes, scorpions and king cobras, and not least of all the ravages of borak, a potent homemade rice wine forced on the cavers by friendly tribesmen. Toward the end of their 10-mile trek, they forded raging rivers in the foothills and finally climbed the knife-edged ridge, 3,000 feet high at this point on the southern end of Gunung Api, or Mount Api, or Api. Then they descended into the valley in which the overhang was located, dubbed it Hidden Valley, and set up camp. Because their group was too small to mount a rescue operation should disaster strike, they set up shortwave radio communications with the base camp. Next day, Evis and the other 2 cavers scrambled several hundred feet up the precipitous valley wall through rocky debris and thick vegetation to the massive overhang. Under it, they found a steep slope, slick with mud and water, plunging 600 feet into the mountain. There, the entrance opened into a soaring overhead shaft, 200 feet in diameter and perhaps 1,000 feet high. The team named their discovery Lambang Ramalan, Prediction Cave, in honour of Evis's shrewd prophecy. Exploring the cave beyond the shaft was a sweaty, risky ordeal. The jagged limestone could slice like a razor through cloth and flesh, and the standard safety procedure was to wear protective overalls. Struggling along in the tropical heat was, according to one caver, like having an airless, hot shower. Torrential rains frequently generated subterranean flash floods that could trap or drown cavers, cave seemed to continue into the mountain on the other side of the mound. A trench extended in that direction, but the cavers were at a dead end. Another pile of fallen boulders, a choke, filled the passageway. The explorers did not yet despair, but instead restored to geological detective work to reconstruct the cave's history. A huge river apparently had been flowing through the cavern when the roof collapsed and restricted its flow with the boulder choke. The slower moving water deposited sediment more rapidly, eventually filling the giant tunnel on its roof. During eons of time, the river carved its way deeper into Hidden Valley. The water receded from the cave and the sediment gradually settled, creating a cave floor that bore an imprint of the contours of the roof. By this reasoning, it seemed likely that a passage, perhaps an enormous one, lay beyond the choke. The ancient river must have flowed out of the mountain somewhere, and the cavers scoured its flanks for days, but did not find the missing link to Prediction Cave. Instead, a few miles to the southwest, they discovered two other caverns, Tiger Cave and Clearwater Cave, both with impressive streams flowing from their mouths. If these streams were resurgences of the river in Hidden Valley, the existence of a large cave network in the ridge, although not necessarily the one they had entered at Prediction Cave, would be confirmed. To find out, the cavers watched the water emerging from Clearwater Cave, while porters dumped 44 pounds of a fluorescent green dye into the river near Prediction Cave. The observers at Clearwater thought they saw traces of dye floating past hours later, but the test was inconclusive. The dye apparently had been diluted to invisibility in the network of underground rivers. Still, the circumstantial evidence favouring a connection convinced most of the cavers, and when they later prepared a map of the 30 miles of caves they had explored, they included an underground drainage from the Hidden Valley River to Clearwater Cave. The matter might have ended there, but Evis still believed there was a larger, undiscovered cavern beyond Prediction Cave. In December 1980, he and Ben Lyon, warden of a British caving centre, led a 22-man expedition back to Borneo. This expedition was supported by the Sarawak Forestry Department, which wanted to establish Malu as a caving area and train local people in caving techniques. Evis learned that the entrance was full of deep water, a detail Friedrich had forgotten to mention. Without life jackets or inflatable dinghies, the cavers could not even enter the cave. But they did conduct a new, and this time definitive, dye test. 4.5 hours after porters dumped red dye into the river near Prediction Cave, the resurgence turned crimson, proving that the unexplored passage was the primary conduit for Hidden Valley. The cavers named the passage Lubang Nasib Bagus Malay for Good Luck Cave. So we've got a couple of photographs. This top one says local porters, one in an inflatable dinghy and the other knee-deep in water, navigate the 330-yard-long entrance canal in Borneo's Good Luck Cave. The men were part of the expedition that discovered the cave in December 1980. And down here, a caver hauls himself up a slippery bank above a 50-foot wide plunge pool. At the head of a series of rapids in Good Luck Cave, members of the 1980 expedition had to swim across the pool before they could begin the final approach to Sarawak chamber. And here is a map of Good Luck Cave. Here's the entrance, the plunge pool, and the chamber itself. It extends some 8,000 feet beneath the limestone mountains of Mulu National Park in Borneo. Okay. After an overnight bivouac, the cavers returned to camp for the proper gear and were confined there by heavy rains. In 3 days, 24 inches fell, raising river levels by 10 feet, submerging the floor of the base longhouse under 3 inches of water. For several days the cavers had to use boats simply to move between buildings. Travel farther afield was impossible. As the flood began to recede, the team mounted an exploration in the grand style to survey what they expected to be a major discovery. 2 cavers, the 3-man film crew and 6 porters crowded into a Malay longboat, a huge log dugout with a protective awning amidships and an outboard motor for propulsion. The overloaded craft travelled up the swollen streams as far as it could until the propeller began fouling on trees and stumps, then dropped the cavers and their equipment on a jungled shoreline and headed back to camp. As the outboard's growl faded into the distance, the cavers began following the shore toward the resurgence and found themselves walking in circles. They had landed on an island. The disgruntled explorers gingerly forded the waist-deep torrent, then set up a Spartan temporary camp in a nearby cave. Renewed rains promptly marooned them there for 2 days. When they finally overcame their misfortunes and reached Good Luck Cave on January the 6th, 1981, the team set off up the canal in 2 inflatable dinghies. Evis and Friedrich paddled slowly upstream ahead of the film crew. As the little cautiously edged upward through the slippery rapids for 250 feet to a swirling emerald green pool at their head, which they named the Plunge Pool. Here, the film crew recorded scenes of the cavers swimming through the turbulent water and climbing the steep face at the pool's inlet, a tedious process that entailed considerable posing and reshooting. The entire company then returned to the surface and bivouacked at the cave entrance. After a few hours of sleep, Evis and Friedrich re-entered the cave alone to explore beyond the plunge pool, where the cave abruptly narrowed to a sheer, towering canyon with the river coursing a tortured path along its narrow floor. The only route through the black chasm was a slow, risky horizontal traverse along the canyon wall. A slip could send a caver hurtling onto the rocks 100 feet below. By the light of their carbide helmet lamps, the pair strung safety guidelines across rocky sections until perhaps 400 feet into the traverse they had paid out their entire supply of rope. They faced a smooth blank wall that demanded safety lines. Reluctantly, they returned to the cave entrance. The next day, Evis and Friedrich carried large coils of extra rope to the canyon, clipped themselves to the safety lines with metal carabiners, and rapidly traversed the explored section, then laboriously clambered spider-like across the sheer face, hammering metal bolts into the rock to secure the safety line. Just beyond, the canyon widened and they returned to the river, which broadened and soon disappeared. It was emerging from the cave floor at the base of a steep uphill slope. As the pair began climbing the slope, another caver caught up with them, shouting that a deluge outside was beginning to flood the canal. The three men hastily backtracked yet again to the surface. Although the torrent quickly subsided, days of delay had exhausted the team's food supply and they were forced to return to the base camp. On the following day, Evis broadcast an enthusiastic description of the new cave over the shortwave radio network that connected the expedition's far-flung outposts. He estimated that the cave was 200 feet wide, not the largest passage in Mulu, but quite impressive. Within 24 hours, the base was swarming with speleologists from other camps, all clamouring to explore. Good Luck Cave. The dinghies could hold only 3 cavers with their bulky gear, so the assembled company drew straws for the right to accompany Evis. The honour was won by Dave Checkley, a veteran cave biologist, and Tony White, regarded as one of the world's premier cave explorers. The 3 cavers quickly retraced the route through the plunge pool and the 650-foot traverse, then began climbing the steep, steadily widening closed the passage wall, only to find that the real wall was 100 feet behind it, recalled Evis. Then we'd have to go back and resurvey. After 12 hours and 77 survey legs of 30 metres each, the trio reached a branch passage barely 100 yards long. At its end, they found a boulder choke and felt a strong draught blowing out from it, a sure sign of a connection to the surface. The trench on the north side of the passage and the size and shape of the boulders matched the features Evis had seen 2 years before in Prediction Cave. Here, surely, was the missing link to Hidden Valley. So in this top picture here, barely discernible against the glare of the powerful lights they are holding, members of the British exploration team managed to illuminate only a portion of the huge Sarawak chamber. One team member later described his awe at hearing the incredible echo and feeling the immensity in every direction. Down below, expedition members clamber around a boulder to measure a segment of Sarawak chamber, surveying the 2,300 by 1,300 foot cave floor with its profusion of house-sized boulders. Took 16 hours of uninterrupted work. To this point, the cavers, groping blindly through the dark void, had assumed that they were in a large passage that wound through the mountain with an unseen wall roughly parallel to the one they had been following. Tony White now suggested that they had instead been surveying a huge chamber, but the others doubted the notion. Dave and I thought it just wasn't possible to get a chamber this size, Evis said. We knew from compass bearings that the wall was bending round, but we assumed there was another wall maybe 300 feet away. After several more hours and 23 laborious survey legs, the trio finally reached a narrow passage where the upper end of the underground river appeared, after meandering beneath the cave floor for half a mile. They followed the river until it flowed into a sump, an impossible reach, where the cave roof touches water, more than 2 miles from the cave entrance. The day's 9,000-foot survey had exhausted the 3 cavers. Both Evis and Checkley were suffering from an excruciating tropical fungus infection that turned their feet a flaming red. The cavers called it Mulu Foot and wanted only to get out quickly. But White, still convinced that they were in a gargantuan chamber, proposed returning to the entrance along a straight compass bearing to the southwest, a route that inevitably would run into the opposite wall of a curving passage. So the trio marched out into the dark expanse, maintaining a compass course through a maze of blocks and boulders until they reached a level sandy plain, the signature of an underground chamber. The sudden awareness of the immensity of the black void caused one of the cavers to suffer an acute attack of agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces. None of the 3 would later reveal who panicked, since silence on such matters is an unwritten law among cave as it was